My ex stalked me for 15 years, swearing I was her daughter's father. She told 5 other men the same lie. When DNA tests revealed the truth, what I did for that girl left everyone speechless. I'm 34 years old, I work in commercial construction, and I need to tell this story because what happened with my ex basically haunted me for over 15 years of my life. And only recently was I able to close that chapter in the strangest way possible. The thing is, this woman, Nicole, made me believe for years that I was the father of her daughter. But it turns out she told the same thing to like 5 other guys. And honestly, the whole thing ended up being way more complicated than anyone could imagine. I guess I should start from the beginning, when Nicole and I were dating. This was back in 2008. I was like 19 years old. She was 21. And honestly, I thought things were going well between us. We weren't the perfect couple or anything like that, you know. We had our fights like any young couple, but nothing that made me think I was with someone completely unhinged. I was working in construction doing short contracts, and at that time I got a job that took me out of town for like 5 or 6 weeks. I don't remember exactly how long, but I do remember it was good money, and Nicole told me it was fine, that there was no problem, that she'd miss me but understood it was important for my career. When I came back from that job, like mid-November I think, Nicole received me all excited and told me we needed to talk about something important. I thought maybe she wanted us to move in together or something, but no, she dropped the bomb that she was pregnant. She told me she was like 4 weeks along, or maybe it was 7. Honestly, she changed the version a couple times in that same conversation. But basically, she was telling me I was the father. And that's when the alarm started going off in my head, because, I mean, I'm no math genius, but I could count. And if she was 4 or 7 weeks pregnant and I'd been gone for 5 or 6 weeks, well, the numbers just didn't add up, you know what I mean? I told her we needed to do a paternity test when the baby was born because something wasn't making sense to me, and Nicole's reaction was totally over the top. She went crazy, started screaming about how could I doubt her. How dare I insinuate she'd been unfaithful, that she loved me and I was a horrible human being for even suggesting the baby wasn't mine. That's when I started realizing there was something really off about all this. Because a normal person who has nothing to hide doesn't react like that. They just say, okay, let's do the test and that's it, right? But Nicole flat out refused, and every time I brought up the subject, she'd get hysterical and start with the drama. So, I ended the relationship right there. I told her I couldn't be with someone who refused to do something as simple as a paternity test, and that if the baby really was mine, well, I'd gladly fulfill my responsibilities, but I needed to be sure. I thought that was the end of it. But oh my God, I had no idea what I was getting into. Nicole simply refused to accept that we'd broken up. She called me every day, sometimes several times a day, sent me messages saying she loved me, that the baby was mine, that we were destined to be together, all that kind of stuff that makes you feel super uncomfortable. Grace was born in June the following year, and that's when Nicole started her smear campaign for real. She told everyone, and when I say everyone, I mean everyone, that I was Grace's father, but that I'd abandoned her, that I was an irresponsible father who refused to take care of his daughter, that I was basically a bad person. People started seeing me differently. Mutual friends stopped talking to me, and I was there like, but I told her I'd gladly take the paternity test and she's the one refusing. But nobody believed me because Nicole was really good at crying and playing the victim. And then the harassment started, which literally lasted for years. Nicole would show up at my work with Grace, show up at the grocery store where I shopped, show up at restaurants where I was having dinner with friends, always with the kid, and always making a scene. She'd say things like, "Look at your daughter. Don't you feel anything? How can you be so cruel?" And poor Grace standing there not understanding anything. I felt horrible for the kid, honestly, because it wasn't her fault to be in the middle of all this craziness. But I was also super frustrated because Nicole refused to do the test that would solve everything. I had to get restraining orders against her, and those things had to be renewed every 2 years, which was a huge pain because it meant going to court, filling out papers, explaining the whole situation again, and Nicole always showed up to those hearings with Grace to try to make me look bad in front of the judge. She'd say things like, "He doesn't even want to see his own daughter. Look what kind of man he is." And there I was trying to explain to the judge that I just wanted a DNA test, but she refused. Some judges were understanding, others looked at me like I was the bad guy in the story. This continued for years, literal years. Grace was growing up and I'd see her from a distance in those awkward situations where Nicole would put her in front of me. And the kid started having like this confused expression every time she saw me. Like she didn't really know who I was, but had been told she should know me. It was horrible, absolutely horrible. Because on one hand, I didn't want to be part of this kid's life if she wasn't my daughter, but on the other hand, I didn't want her growing up thinking her supposed father had abandoned her. The situation continued being a complete disaster for almost a decade, and I'd already resigned myself to this being my life forever, you know? Like I'd already accepted that I was going to have to renew the restraining order every 2 years until one of us died, basically. But then, like around 2018 or so, things took a completely unexpected turn. Turns out, a friend of mine, Aaron, was at a bar with some coworkers, and there, he met a guy named Adam who started telling him this crazy story about his ex-girlfriend, who said he was the father of her daughter, but refused to do a paternity test and constantly harassed him. Aaron was sitting there like, wait a minute, this story sounds way too familiar, and when he asked for more details, sure enough, it was Nicole. Same Nicole, same Grace, same exact story but with Adam instead of me. Aaron called me immediately, obviously, and told me everything. At first, I couldn't believe it. Like, really? She's doing this to more people. But then I thought it made a lot of sense. Aaron gave me Adam's number, and I called him. And when we met up for coffee and started comparing stories, it was like I was seeing my own life in another person. Everything was identical. The same tactics, the same lies, the same dramatic scenes in public places. And the craziest thing is that we found more guys after that. Adam knew another one named Tyler, who'd also gone through the same thing. And between all of us, we started doing our own private detective-type investigation, and we found that Nicole had been doing this with at least 5 different men during all those years. She told all of us we were Grace's father, harassed all of us. Some had given her money, believing it was their responsibility. Others, like me, had simply gotten restraining orders, but we all had the same story. We decided we had to do something together, because individually Nicole had managed to manipulate the system and play the victim. But if we all united and presented our cases together, maybe a judge would finally force her to do the DNA tests. We hired a lawyer between all of us, and I'm not going to lie, it was expensive, but worth every penny. We presented the case in court showing all the documents, all the restraining orders, all the harassment messages, everything. The day of the hearing was surreal. Nicole arrived with Grace, obviously, because she never went anywhere without her when it had to do with this subject. But this time the judge, a woman like 55 years old, who looked like she wasn't going to put up with anyone's nonsense, listened to all our testimonies, and then told Nicole directly that she was going to order mandatory paternity tests with all of us, and that Nicole had no choice, that she either cooperated or could face contempt of court charges. Nicole tried to do her usual dramatic show, crying and saying this was traumatic for Grace. How could they do this to her? That it was obvious who the father was, though she never said who specifically, but the judge paid her no attention. She ordered the tests and gave us a date to come back with the results. I left that court feeling like a weight had been lifted off me, even though we still didn't have the results. Just the fact that we were finally going to have answers after all these years was a huge relief. The tests were done like 2 weeks later, and we all had to go to a lab, where they took samples from us, and they also took one from Grace. The kid was like 14 years old at that point and looked super confused about the whole situation, which broke my heart because it was clear Nicole had never explained anything to her, just used her as a tool to manipulate all of us. When the results came in, we had another court hearing, and that's when everything exploded. One by one, the judge read the results. Cameron, not the father. Adam, not the father. Tyler, not the father. And so on, with everyone. Nicole went completely white, and Grace started crying right there in court. I felt relieved. Obviously, after 15 years, I finally had official proof of something I'd always known. But I also felt bad for Grace because she'd just discovered her mom had lied to her about her father her entire life. Nicole had a total meltdown in court. She started screaming that the results were wrong, that the lab had made a mistake, that this was impossible, and the judge had to order them to remove her from the room. Later, that same day, she violated the restraining order by showing up at my house screaming that I was a liar and had manipulated the results somehow, which makes no sense, but whatever. I called the police, and they arrested her right there, and that was the last time I saw her in person, thank God. Like a week after all that, I got a call from an older lady named Betty, who turned out to be Grace's great-grandmother, Nicole's grandmother, basically. She told me she'd been living out of state but had found out about everything that had happened and wanted to apologize on behalf of the family. She explained that she'd been giving Nicole money for years so she could support Grace, but now that she knew the whole truth about the lies and harassment, she'd decided to take full custody of Grace and cut off all financial support to Nicole. Betty sounded like a super sweet lady, and she told me she completely understood if I didn't want to have anything to do with Grace after everything that had happened, but that if I ever wanted to meet her in a normal context, without Nicole involved, she'd be willing to facilitate that. I thanked her, but told her honestly I needed time to process everything, and she understood perfectly. Like 2 months later, I got a letter in the mail, and it was from Grace. It was a handwritten letter, kind of long, where she basically told me she was sorry for everything her mom had done to me, that she hadn't known anything about the lies until that day in court, and that she completely understood if I hated her or never wanted to know about her. But she also told me her life had been total confusion, that she'd grown up not knowing who her father really was, and now that she knew it wasn't any of us, she felt like she didn't belong anywhere. That letter broke my heart. I'm not going to lie. I wrote back, telling her I'd never hated her, that none of this was her fault, and that I hoped she could build a good life with her great-grandmother Betty. It wasn't a very long letter, honestly, because I didn't really know what to say, but I wanted her to know I didn't blame her for anything. I thought that was going to be the end of this whole story, but turns out it wasn't. Like a year and a half later, like end of 2019, Grace contacted me through social media. She was like 16 years old at that point, and wrote me asking if we could talk. I was a little nervous, honestly, because I didn't know what to expect, but I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop, with Betty present, of course. Grace told me she'd been thinking a lot about who her real biological father was, and that her mom, Nicole, refused to tell her anything useful, kept insisting that one of us was the father and the tests were wrong, which was clearly a proven lie by now. She asked me if I'd be willing to help her investigate, basically to try to find her real father. Honestly, my first reaction was like, why me? Why should I get involved in this after everything? But when I saw her sitting there, this 6-year-old girl who literally had no idea who her father was and whose mom had destroyed any chance of her having a normal childhood, I couldn't tell her no. I told her yes, I'd help her however I could. We started investigating together, and this became like a weird project, where Grace, Betty, and I tried to reconstruct the timeline of Nicole's life around the time of Grace's conception. Betty helped us a lot because she remembered specific things from that time, places where Nicole had been, people she knew. We found some old photos on social media of Nicole from that era, and in one of the photos there was a guy who appeared in several, a guy named James, and Betty said she remembered Nicole had been dating him for a while. We tracked down James, which took like 3 months because the guy had moved to another state, but we finally found him. I explained the whole situation to him over the phone, and the guy at first thought it was a joke or a scam, but when I sent him photos of Grace and told him the complete story, he agreed to take a DNA test. He said he'd also dated Nicole briefly back in 2008, and then she just disappeared from his life without explanation. And well, turns out James was the father. The DNA test came back positive with like 99.9% certainty. Grace finally had her answer after all these years, and James, well, the guy was in total shock because he'd just discovered he had a 6-year-old daughter he didn't know existed. The last update I have is that Grace and James have been building a relationship, which I think is incredible considering all the circumstances. Betty still has legal custody, but James is very involved in Grace's life now. Sees her regularly, they're getting to know each other. Grace sent me a message like 2 months ago thanking me for helping her find him, saying she finally feels like she has a real dad, and Nicole, well, Nicole still lives in her. World of denial. According to Betty, to this day she insists James isn't the real father, that the tests are wrong, that one of us is. She doesn't even see Grace regularly anymore because Betty keeps her away, and honestly, it's better that way. I can finally live my life without looking over my shoulder, expecting Nicole to show up at any moment. I haven't had to renew the restraining order. It's been like 3 years since the last time I heard anything from her directly. Sometimes Grace sends me messages telling me how things are going with James, and I respond. But I keep a certain distance, because at the end of the day, I'm not her father and I don't want to confuse things more. The weirdest thing about this whole situation is that I started out being the supposed victim of Nicole's deception and ended up being the person who helped her daughter find her real father. Life is strange like that sometimes, I guess. And after 15 years of absolute nightmare, I can finally say I'm at peace with all of this.